3 years ago, I made a video about the port of 9 Hours, 9 Persons, 9 Doors, a game that originally came out on the Nintendo DS. What was originally going to be a quick video talking about the changes made to the game's twist ending turned out to be much more than I was anticipating. It ended up becoming a passion project, and it's still the video I'm most proud of. Thankfully, people took notice of it and left a bunch of comments, which I'm very grateful for. This video is to address the common things people brought up in the comments section, as well as adding a few more thoughts about the port that I deliberately left out of the first video to balance out my enormous bias against the game. A lot of this video script is ripped straight from my replies to these comments that are posted frequently enough that I feel like making a follow-up video is beneficial. I recommend watching that video before this one, or the spoiler-free video found in that video's description. But just in case you don't want to watch an hour-long video, the gist of it was this. I didn't like the port of 999 because 1, there was a lot of awkward changes made to the dialogue to accommodate the port only having one screen versus the DS's 2 screens. 2, some quality of life changes that fundamentally changed some core story aspects. And 3, the changes made to the ending of the game. And since that video still holds up well on its own, and because I think it has a nice balance of pros and cons about the game considering how much I freaking hate it, I'm not going to filter out my biases this time around. Despite the DS version being my favorite game, I hate the port with a burning passion. What I say about the port being a good game in the original video is still true. I do think it's a good game, but it's also ironically my least favorite game ever made. No other game fills me with so many negative feelings and rage. So sorry about my incoming seething unadulterated anger. You can still click out of the video if you want. By far the most common comment I got on the original video was about my take on the character dialogue, which isn't surprising considering it takes up nearly half the video. Comments range from saying I was too harsh towards the dialogue, to thinking that I was over-exaggerating, to them saying that they didn't think it was a big deal. Which is fine. Frankly, I was expecting a lot more negative feedback since most discussions I found while making the video concluded that the port was the better game. However, there seems to be something I worded poorly to make some misunderstand the point I was making, because multiple comments interpreted my criticism as talking to yourself is bad, when that's not what I'm saying. Looking back, however, I can definitely see some of the things I said leading to some misunderstandings. Now, talking to yourself isn't inherently a bad thing, and I know some of you are already saying that this is normal. Too much of anything is a bad thing, and the amount that Junpei talks to himself just comes off as unnatural. And, okay, look. It's normal to talk to yourself sometimes, but at this point Junpei has done nothing but that in 2 different situations. So let me clarify. It's not that Junpei voicing his thoughts is what I'm criticizing. It's that he's essentially narrating the story out loud to himself in the most unnatural way possible. The way it's handled in the game makes it seem like the writers didn't think the audience could make these connections on their own. So they had their characters stating every little obvious thing that was in front of them. That's why I say in the video that they are essentially breaking the 4th wall. The characters themselves almost seem aware that an audience is watching them. If thinking to yourself or voicing your thoughts were my criticism, then there would be a slew of other things I would hate for the same reason, but that's not my argument. Let's use Spy Family as an example, as it's something that I think uses self-narration very well. The main character Lloyd speaks to himself all the time. If the point I was making was about how I thought talking to yourself was unnatural, then I should hate this show for that reason alone, Lloyd speaking to himself. However, Spy Family conveys its dialogue and inner thinking much more naturally, as Lloyd is almost always problem solving in his head. There are a few awkward lines here and there where he states the obvious to himself for the sake of the audience, but for the most part, it's him trying to figure things out, put things together, plan ahead, etc. Junpei in the port is technically problem solving, but it's for things he already knows and has figured out. Like the example I give in the original video where Junpei has a plan to go in whichever door he wants, the part that follows where he echoes his plan to himself in his head after he had already planned it, set it up, acted it out, and succeeded in said plan just screams that the writers needed to let the audience know what was happening somehow, but couldn't find a more natural way to do it. The information could have been given to the audience in a much more natural way to make them feel like they weren't being spoon-fed. It is incredibly frustrating for me. This is why I said in the video that the game would have been better off switching to novel mode more often, because that same scene could have worked just fine if the narrator took over and copy-pasted what the DS version had, because the narrator's job is to explain information that isn't apparent or clear to the audience. So it's not the fact that the characters voice out their thoughts or think to themselves that's the problem for me. It's the way it was presented. For the sake of argument though, let's say that every line Junpei and the others have is completely natural. Even if that were the case, this is quite simply not how you write dialogue. Writing that respects the audience's intelligence lets them figure things out on their own, lets them read in between the lines, naturally points to assets outside the dialogue to explain things, has things go unexplained for a while to create a natural atmosphere, and oftentimes lets you use your imagination. The dialogue in the port is set to spell out literally everything for you without any any effort on your part at all. You'd think after the line of Junpei saying, "Whoa!" followed by the imagery abruptly switching between him being on the bunk bed to him being on the floor, followed by him expressing his pain and confusion, that we'd be able to put together what is happening very easily. He woke up and fell off the bed. Got it. Check. Moving on. What should follow is him commenting on how the ground is shaking and then getting up to absorb his surroundings and questioning where he is. But that's not what we get. He has to comment that he was indeed on the bed, comment on how far he fell from the bed, how falling did indeed hurt him, make a meaningless comment about which part of him got hurt and how it affected his eyesight, disregard that comment immediately, and then comment on how the ground is shaking. It's all information we put together ourselves because of the context clues. And none of that is even considering that these were Junpei's very first lines, when novel mode is still being forced on the player and tells you exactly what's going on anyway. Do you want me to keep going? Because I freaking can. I could literally comment on how every single line in this game is so freaking terrible from start to finish, but I didn't want to make my video 48 hours long. The DS version could have never existed and these lines would still be terrible. If the DS version didn't exist, I imagine my reaction would be similar to those who post their playthroughs of the game onto YouTube. I'd probably be making fun of the dialogue until I eventually got sick of pointing it out and numbing myself to it so I can actually experience the story.
And the rightmost door is 8. There's no doubt. They're numbered doors.
Good observation, buddy.
We put our left hand on it, our bracelet number gets entered into the device.
Junpei, what are you...
He's standing saying this out loud
There's
as
a
like...
child being stabbed in front of you.
Junpei's like, I get it.
But because I have experienced the DS version, I already have a deep attachment to the game. So instead of making fun of the game like everyone else, I just got really mad. Out of everything, it's the thing that bothered me most about the port, so I put extra emphasis on it. The changed dialogue got an angry response out of me, while changes to the true ending got a sad or a somber response out of me. It's hard to convey just how mind-blowing it was to have the dialogue changes being so consistently bad while seeing no one talking about it online. I'm not exaggerating when I say that the only discourse about the port's changes was only about the ending. The quality of life changes were talked about extensively, but it seems like the ending was the only thing brought up when talking about which version had the advantage over the other in terms of writing. I was hoping to express in that video that the differences in quality between the two games go way beyond the plot twist. There's a reason why talking about the twist specifically is only a sixth of the video. Yes, the end to the port is disappointing, but far from the reason I didn't like it. One of the main purposes of the video was to try and steer that conversation away from just the ending. Okay, moving on. Something I saw a surprising number of times were questions asking if adventure mode was the only mode with awkward dialogue, with even some concluding that playing the game would be the same experience as the DS version as long as you played it on novel mode. I guess I didn't make that clear, so let me do that. Both modes have the same stupid, awkward sounding dialogue, and while I can agree that novel mode makes the experience better, the problems I go over in the video are still present. The awkward dialogue is less noticeable because now it's spaced in between the narration. So like, if you're good with that, then that's fine, but even with the narration, the changes they made to the character dialogue almost make it worth not having at all. It's a lose-lose situation. The narration still gives some greater detail in some scenes, like the ninth man exploding, but now that the characters are saying the lines that the narration used to have, the narration itself almost serves no purpose, except to space out the awkward sounding dialogue. The extra detail it gives is just the zombie remains left from the DS version, now only giving filler information and extra detail that doesn't really add anything. The narration that was taken out makes it lack life. Any semblance of characterization it has isn't there anymore with how bone dry it is now. So when I see people advising to only using novel mode, the only thing I can think of is that they're already playing the port, so it barely matters. If there's one thing I do kind of regret about the original video is holding myself back when talking about the quality of life changes. As good as I think they are, the fact that people think it's some kind of gotcha when talking about the two versions is infuriating. Almost like the DS version not having voice acting is some kind of freaking deal breaker. I'm not saying that the quality of life changes aren't great, because they are, but they are also more subjective than one might think. Seeing comments on social media saying that the very existence of voice acting is what makes the port the better version is very perplexing to me. I see this opinion a lot online, but I'm not sure I fully agree. To me, it's like saying that an audiobook is automatically better than just reading the book regularly when both are good options. I don't think one is inherently better than the other. The addition of voice acting can be great, but I think people greatly undermine how powerful reading things for yourself can be. 999 is fortunate enough to have good voice acting, but all it takes is one botched line to break immersion.
Using force, I see.
Take, for instance, the scene where everyone neatly lines up to meet Junpei while they're apparently seemingly in a hurry. Take note of the music contrasted with the tone of their voices.
I guess it's another one of us now.
A dancer?
No, I'm not. You better get moving.
Okay then.
It isn't until Ace comes on the scene that there's some urgency. There are multiple times in the game where the characters just sound way too casual for the situation they're in. That is a bit subjective though, and I'm aware of that. I'm sure many of you disagree, but playing the DS version, I could read the characters' lines in whatever tone I thought was appropriate. The good thing about the original not being voice acted is that you can have the characters sound however you feel is natural. With the voice acting though, the creative interpretation is limited. Another quality of life change that's more subjective than you might think is the updated visuals. The changes from the DS version to the port are obvious, but I wouldn't say that the port is a massive leap from the DS like I saw one comment say. Actually, I don't think it necessarily means that one is better than the other at all. There's a reason why SNES games have aged better in terms of graphics compared to N64 and PS1 games. Pixel art is visually appealing and is still relevant today. The sprite work from the DS version and the upscaled art in the port are both very good. It obviously depends on preference. The only quality of life change I can even begin to consider being objective is the flowchart. But even then, it's choosing convenience over artistic vision and integrity. In my video, I put a lot of emphasis on why starting the game over was crucial to the original experience of the game. But I also agree with what other people have said as well. It's something holding back a lot of people from finishing the game because of its repetitive nature. Not everyone has the same kind of patience me and others have for the game. It's something that I fully believe was kept in to uphold Uchikoshi's artistic vision. The inclusion of it led to the game having more of an impact. jackdonsurfer made a video about a year and a half ago about The Last Guardian, and a point he raises and explains so well about the game perfectly encapsulates how I feel about starting over in 999 every time after getting an ending.
Moments that are repetitive, slow, or boring can all be effective tools for supporting an artistic vision because they don't exist in a vacuum, even if they might normally be viewed as flaws. However, games differ from other forms of entertainment due to their general focus on immediacy. An ability to take control of the experience is a big part of this medium's allure, so audiences and developers alike have grown an understandable aversion to any needless time that strips the player of their agency. I think the medium's emphasis on convenience has conditioned players to automatically attribute any frustration or boredom they experience while playing to poor game design, without consideration for why the designer might want them to feel that way in the first place. The pervasive preconception that games should always prioritize fun has value in some instances, but demanding every game to subscribe to that philosophy only limits our understanding of how interactivity can creatively induce emotions and convey ideas.
It's a very good video. I encourage you to watch the whole thing. I understand that people like the conveniences of the quality of life changes, but what I don't understand is how that can justify bad writing in a visual novel of all things. I respect the opinions of those who like the port. I really do. I warn people at the start of all my videos that I have strong opinions about things that they might like. But for 999, I'm so deeply passionate about the DS version that it's very difficult for me to see the port in a positive light at all. Indeed, it all comes down to personal preference. Though I think my arguments hold merit, I am aware that the arguments on the other side hold just as much. I also recognize that the things that bother me about the game might not bother everyone. There are people who played the port of 999 and had just as powerful of an experience as I did with the DS version. The points made in the video are just the opinions of one person, which is why it's so odd to me to find comments that just state the obvious. That this is all my opinion, that I'm too emotionally attached to the DS version, that I wouldn't have had as bad of an experience with the game if I played the port first. Yes, I am indeed emotionally attached to the DS version. I'm not saying I don't have bias. I said that at the beginning and end of the original video. I'm simply trying to explain why I personally don't like the port. Perhaps I am too hard on the game, but I didn't want to hold myself back because it was an incredibly frustrating experience for me. What's even more frustrating is when I do try and have a civil discussion about it on any given website. Most of what I see is superior this and inferior that. And when someone does try and have a conversation about it, trying to be unbiased even with their preferences to either version of the game, it abruptly ends without any meaningful discussion. I often keep my mouth shut when seeing these comments on Reddit or Twitter or wherever, but every so often I'll decide to voice my opinion while giving the non-Nonary Games version the benefit of the doubt. Preferences exist, cool, so let's talk about a way we can point any newcomer to a version that they like. It's clearly a divisive issue, so perhaps showing the differences between the two versions without spoilers, commentary, or bias can help a newcomer make an informed decision. The responses I see actually aren't even bad, but it's just so tiresome seeing the same things being said over and over again. The port is without a doubt the best version for newcomers because all the DS version has going for it is the twist ending. No, it isn't. The game is much more than its ending. I'm trying to be reasonable and give the non-regames version a chance so that there can be some kind of discussion, but it just feels like no matter what I bring up, it always falls on deaf ears. So, you know what? This is my video. I'll be as biased as I want. Literally everything about the non-regame version bothers me. Like, how do you just not notice the issues in the port? It is so freaking funny hearing the voice actors acting out these terrible lines of dialogue as seriously as possible, to have the characters explain to themselves and to each other things they've already figured out. It's hard not to break out into laughter every time the characters grunt and gasp in serious moments just because of an ellipsis. There is just no atmosphere in the game at all. The flowchart just destroys the original artistic vision of the DS version. Starting the game over multiple times was an intentional decision, even if it is repetitive. That was a necessary sacrifice needed to tell the game story as the author wanted to. It made the game story that much more impactful. I understand that people don't want to spend a lot of time skipping through text, but can we really recommend a version with simple conveniences when we are recommending a visual novel? At least I see people mentioning the awful dialogue now, but there's still no discussion. People just don't freaking care. The quality of life changes are all the rage, and they don't want to hear or talk about the writing. Is the story really still good if so much of the dialogue is so bad? Is the concept itself really enough to carry it? Does the ending still have an impact when I can't take the rest of the game seriously at all? The rest of the game is so good, but people only want to talk about the ending. When I started that video, it was originally going to be about the ending, solely. After I started playing, I legit was actually afraid that this was the game I played on the DS all those years ago, and that my taste had changed enough that I only now notice these problems. But nope, the difference really is night and day. I watched a lot of people play this game, and after seeing so many streamers and YouTubers making snide comments and remarks about the bad writing, it just tells me that they didn't take the game seriously right off the bat. It's something they eventually had to get used to. Numbing yourself to something so you can start enjoying it isn't something that you should need to do. I remember needing to get used to the old, terrible English dub of DBZ when revisiting it as an adult to finally start enjoying it without cringing. But even then, whenever I tried to go back to continue where I left off, I needed to overcome that awkward dub all over again. I eventually just went back to either the manga or watching Kai. Actually, I kind of like that analogy. Dragon Ball is something I love, something I grew up with. The Funimation dub is what introduced me to it and what ended up making me love it. With that said, I would under no circumstances ever recommend that old dub to anyone watching for the first time. You shouldn't be starting on Z anyway, shame on you. If I wanted to recommend what I thought was the best version, I wouldn't even bring the anime up. I'd recommend the manga. That's the best way to experience it. Even though the anime has special effects, voice acting, better graphics, and a flowchart, animation, the manga is still not only the best way to experience the series, but how the author originally intended the experience to be. The same is with 9 Hours, 9 Persons, 9 Doors. Even though not everyone will have a positive experience with the DS version, I feel like there's a much higher chance of that positive experience happening with that version than with the port. And if they don't end up having a good time with that version because of starting the game over or some other caveat, then I'd point them to the port. I'd rather they experience the game at all than to never finish it on DS. I'm certain most people will have at least a good time with the game, but that's another one of my problems. Why would I recommend a good game over an excellent one? Why would I recommend the port when the story is better told in another way? Why would I ever recommend conveniences over good writing? Because no matter how far away I try and distance myself from my biases for the DS version, no matter how many comments I get saying how great they thought the port was, or even comments saying how it ended up becoming one of their favorite games, no matter how many times I respond to these comments or give the port the benefit of the doubt, I just can't get over this nagging feeling that people are having a good experience with the game instead of an incredible one.